The lash bit dawn. Cold metal posts dug into wrists bound tight. Ilara's world narrowed to the bite of leather, the gasp of the crowd, the grey sky weeping a chill mist. Her shift, already torn, offered no comfort, only shame. Each strike was a branding, a public declaration of her nothingness. Dirt and spittle clung to her cheek. She tasted blood, her own. Another blow. Her knees buckled, but the ropes held her upright, a macabre puppet for their judgment. The town of redemption. A cruel irony. Elder Thorn, his face a mask of righteous fury, gestured. The whip cracked again. Sound tore from her, low, animal. She fought not to scream. A scream was surrender. She had nothing left but this small, bitter defiance. The faces in the crowd swam. Some hungry for the spectacle, some averted, cowed. All complicit. Her crime? Existing. Being unwanted. A burden left by a dead husband, a debt unpaid. The wind carried the scent of rain and fear. Her fear. Their fear. Of what she represented. Of the wildness they sought to beat from her. Her vision blurred. The pain was a living thing, coiling in her belly, spreading fire through her veins. Each breath a shard of glass. She focused on the feel of rough hemp against her skin, a grounding point in the vortex of agony. A horse whinnied, sharp, cutting through the murmurs. Heads turned. A ripple of unease, different from the morbid anticipation before. A figure on horseback, dark against the pale morning. Tall. Broad. Unhurried. He rode as if the very land bent to his will. The crowd shifted, parted like water before a stone. Silence fell, heavy, expectant. He stopped a few paces from the post, his horse, a massive black destrier, blowing steam into the cold air. The man was cloaked, his face shadowed by the brim of a wide hat. But his stillness was more potent than any movement. He was known. Feared. Kalen. The hunter. Lived in the deep woods, spoke little, saw much. Some said he was touched by spirits, others that he was a spirit himself, a guardian of the wild places man had not yet despoiled. Elder Thorn puffed his chest. This is town justice, hunter. No concern of yours. Kalen's gaze, when he finally lifted his head, was like winter frost. It settled on Ilara, a long, unreadable look. She saw no pity there. No condemnation. Only assessment. As if she were a wounded animal he was deciding whether to dispatch or for what. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against bruised ribs. He dismounted, his movements economical, precise. The leather of his chaps creaked. Spurs chimed faintly, the only sound in the frozen tableau. He walked towards her. Each step resonated on the packed earth. He stopped before her, close enough for her to smell the scent of pine, wood smoke, and something wild, like the storm-swept mountains he called home. His eyes, the color of moss agate, met hers. They held a depth she could not fathom. He did not speak to Thorn. He spoke only to the man holding the whip, whose arm had frozen mid-air. Enough. His voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together. It was not a request. Thorn spluttered. She is a harlot, a debtor. She defiles our town. She must be punished. Kalen's gaze did not leave Ilara. He reached out a gloved hand, not to her, but to the ropes binding her left wrist. His touch was surprisingly gentle as his fingers worked the knot. She is my bride. The words dropped into the silence, solid, irrefutable. A collective gasp. Disbelief. Ilara's own breath caught. Bride? His? The feared hunter, the recluse? It was madness. A lie? It had to be. But the certainty in his tone gave no room for argument. He freed one hand, then the other. Her arms fell, lifeless, burning. She swayed, vision tunneling. He caught her before she hit the ground, one strong arm around her waist, pulling her against his solid frame. The scent of him was overwhelming. Leather. Earth. Man. She was too weak to resist, too stunned to comprehend. He swept her up as if she weighed nothing. Thorn found his voice, shrill with outrage. You cannot. She belongs to the town's judgment. Kalen turned, Ilara cradled in his arms. His eyes, chips of ice now, pinned Thorn. She belongs to me. He strode towards his horse. The crowd melted away from his path. No one dared meet his gaze. No one dared intervene. He mounted with an agility that belied his size, settling Ilara before him on the saddle. She was a rag doll, limp, her cheek pressed against the rough wool of his coat. The world tilted and spun. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the hunter's unyielding profile, set against the angry red dawn. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait was a distant drum, pulling her away from redemption. Away from the pain. Towards an unknown, perhaps equally terrifying, fate. But for now, the whip was silent. That was all that mattered. The journey was a blur of pain and cold. Each hoofbeat of a great black horse sent jolts through Ilara's ravaged body. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware mostly of the unyielding strength of the arm that held her, the rough texture of Kalen's coat against her cheek, the rhythmic sway. Sometimes she heard his voice, not words, but a low rumble, perhaps meant for the horse, perhaps for her. A sound that, strangely, did not frighten. It was just there. Elemental. Like the wind sighing through the unseen pines they passed. When she was lucid, the world was a smear of greys and browns, the sky perpetually overcast. He had wrapped her in his own heavy cloak, a shield against the biting air. The scent of him, pine and frost and something uniquely male, was a constant, enveloping presence. She did not know how long they rode. Hours bled into what felt like days. There were no questions from him. No explanations. Just the relentless forward movement. He stopped once by a rushing stream. Dismounted carefully, laying her on a bed of fallen leaves. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he offered her water from a cupped palm. It was cold, sweet, life-giving. She drank, shivering, her eyes never leaving his shadowed face. What did he want? Why this charade? Bride. The word echoed, absurd. He examined the raw welts on her back with an impassive expression, then recovered them. He said nothing. The silence was vast, broken only by the sounds of the wilderness. Birdsong. The rustle of unseen creatures. The murmur of the water. It was a different silence than the one in Redemption. That had been a silence of fear, of judgment. This was older. Deeper. As dusk began to paint the sky in bruised purples and greys, they arrived. A cabin. Small, sturdy, built of dark logs, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering firs. A curl of smoke rose from a stone chimney, a fragile tether to warmth in the encroaching cold. It was the most isolated place she had ever seen. A sanctuary or a prison? She could not tell. He carried her inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the embers glowing in a stone hearth. One room. Sparsely furnished. A rough-hewn table, 2 stools. A cot in one corner, piled with furs. The air smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and drying leather. He laid her on the cot, the furs surprisingly soft beneath her. For a moment, she felt a terror so profound it stole her breath. Alone. With this strange, silent man. In this wild, remote place. What would he do? But he merely stoked the fire, adding logs until flames leaped, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The warmth began to seep into her chilled bones, a welcome sensation. He moved about the small space with quiet efficiency, preparing something at the hearth. The aroma of stew, rich with meat and herbs, filled the cabin. Hunger, a forgotten sensation, gnawed at her. He brought her a wooden bowl of the stew and a horn spoon. Placed it beside her. Then retreated to the table, eating his own meal in silence. He did not watch her. He did not speak. He simply existed, a powerful, contained presence in the small room. Ilara ate slowly, each spoonful an effort. The warm food spread through her, a balm to her battered body and frayed spirit. When she was done, he took the empty bowl. He spread a salve, cool and smelling of pine resin, on her savaged back. His touch was impersonal, almost clinical, yet it did not feel violating. It felt like care. A strange, unfamiliar concept. He banked the fire for the night, then unrolled a bedroll for himself on the floor, near the door. As far from her cot as the small cabin allowed. He lay down, pulling a thick fur over himself. And then, there was only the sound of the crackling fire, the sigh of the wind outside, and his steady, even breathing in the darkness. Ilara lay awake for a long time, listening. The pain was a dull ache now, a constant reminder. But the terror had receded, replaced by a profound exhaustion and a fragile, tentative sense of, not safety, not yet. But a reprieve. He had rescued her from the whip. He had claimed her as his bride, a lie so bold it had stunned a town into submission. He had brought her here. He had fed her, tended her wounds. And he had asked for nothing in return. She did not understand him. This feared hunter. This silent protector. But as sleep finally claimed her, a single thought surfaced through the fog of pain and confusion. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was not entirely alone with her suffering. Someone else knew. And he had not turned away. Days bled into weeks, measured by the rhythm of sun and shadow across the cabin floor, by the changing tenor of the wind in the pines. Ilara healed. Slowly. The angry red welts on her back faded to puckered scars, a permanent map of her ordeal. Kalen changed the dressings daily, his touch consistently impersonal yet careful. He brewed bitter teas from forest herbs that eased the pain and kept fever at bay. He said little. Drink, rest, his pronouncements were law in their silent world. She obeyed. There was nothing else to do. At first, she spent most of her time on the cot, drifting in a haze of pain and weariness. She watched him. He moved with a quiet grace, whether splitting wood with powerful, economical strokes, or mending a tear in his buckskin shirt with surprising neatness. His hands, calloused and strong, could be remarkably gentle. He hunted. Returned with game slung over his shoulder, the scent of blood and forest clinging to him. He skinned and dressed the animals with practiced skill, wasting nothing. He taught her, wordlessly, by example. He would leave a skin to be scraped, a pile of vegetables to be chopped, a shirt needing a patch. She began to do these small tasks, her movements clumsy at first, then more sure. Her hands, soft from disuse and prior servitude, toughened. The work was a distraction from the ghosts that haunted her waking hours, from the memories that still brought sweat to her brow in the dead of night. She learned the language of the cabin, of his movements. The way he set his jaw when a storm was brewing. The slight upturn of his lips, not quite a smile, when she managed to start the fire on her own. Shared silence became their communion. It was a silence filled not with tension, but with a growing understanding. A fragile trust, woven thread by thread with each passing day, each shared meal, each quiet evening by the fire. He never pressed her. Never asked about her past. Never explained his own. His reasons for claiming her remained a mystery. Sometimes, she would catch him looking at her, his moss-agate eyes thoughtful, unreadable. In those moments, a flicker of the old fear would return, but it was fainter now, overshadowed by a hesitant curiosity. One evening, as he was cleaning his long hunting knife by the firelight, its blade gleaming, she found her voice. It was a mere whisper, rusty from disuse. "Why?" He paused, his hand stilling. He did not look at her immediately. The fire crackled, a log shifting, sending a shower of sparks upwards. Then, his gaze met hers. Steady. Deep. No one deserves the whip, that was all. He returned to his task. But the words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It was not an answer that explained everything, but it explained enough. It spoke of a core of justice, of a quiet morality that ran deeper than she could have imagined. She began to explore the small clearing around the cabin. The forest was a vast, intimidating presence, but the immediate surroundings felt safe under his unspoken protection. She found wild berries, dug for edible roots, her knowledge gleaned from a half-forgotten childhood. She brought them back, a silent offering. He would nod, accepting them into their shared stores. She mended his clothes, the rough fabric familiar under her fingers. She learned to cook with what the forest provided, her meals simple but nourishing. The cabin began to feel less like a prison and more like a refuge. A place of quiet healing. He taught her to set snares. How to read the tracks of animals in the soft earth. How to listen to the warnings of the birds. His teaching was always practical, direct, without condescension. He respected her efforts, her small successes. One afternoon, he returned from the forest carrying not game, but a small, frightened fawn, its leg blooded, caught in a cruel trap not of his making. He brought it inside, laying it gently by the hearth. Ilara watched as he cleaned the wound, his large hands incredibly tender. He showed her how to bind the leg with strips of clean linen and a makeshift splint. Together, they cared for the creature. It was a small thing, yet it felt significant. A shared act of nurturing. A crack in his stoic facade. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes then, something beyond mere protectiveness. A sorrow, perhaps. A memory. He never spoke of it. But sometimes, she would see him watching the fawn, his expression distant, lost in thoughts he did not share. Her own scars were healing, inside and out. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was receding, replaced by a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. She still woke sometimes from nightmares, the phantom sting of the whip on her skin. But now, the scent of wood smoke and pine, the steady presence of the hunter in the same small space, was a comfort. A shield. She was no longer just Ilara the victim. She was Ilara who survived. Ilara who learned. Ilara who was, slowly, finding her way back to herself, in the heart of the wild, under the silent watch of the feared hunter. The peace of their mountain sanctuary was shattered on a crisp autumn morning. The air, usually clean and smelling of pine, carried a faint, alien scent. Horses. Several of them. And men. Kalen, already outside chopping wood, went still. His head came up, listening, every line of his body taut with sudden alertness. He said nothing, but Ilara, who had come to the doorway with a warm drink for him, saw the change in his eyes. The hunter was fully present, dangerous. He met her gaze, a silent command. Go inside. Stay hidden. Her heart leaped into her throat, a cold fist of dread squeezing it. The past. It had found her. She retreated into the dimness of the cabin, but not to cower. Not anymore. Her hands, though trembling, sought the heavy iron poker by the hearth. It was a meager weapon, but it was something. She would not be taken easily. The sound of riders grew closer, then voices. Harsh. Arrogant. Familiar. Elder Thorn. And another, deeper, crueler. Silas. Her dead husband's brother. The man who believed she was his property, his inheritance. Kalen. Hunter. Show yourself. We know you have her. Thorn's voice, reedy but filled with self-importance. Kalen stood unmoving by the woodpile, axe still in hand, its polished head gleaming. He looked like a figure carved from stone, an ancient guardian of the forest. Silas and Thorn, accompanied by 3 rough-looking men, rode into the clearing. They reined in their horses, their expressions a mixture of bravado and unease as they faced the silent hunter. There she is, Silas sneered, his eyes fixing on the cabin doorway where Ilara knew she was partly visible. Thought you could hide her from me, hunter? She's mine. My brother's leavings. Ilara's breath hitched. The old shame, the old fear, tried to claw its way back. But something new, something forged in the quiet crucible of the mountains, rose to meet it. Resolve. Kalen spoke, his voice calm, deadly. She is not yours, she is. By law. By right. Silas blustered, his hand straying to the pistol tucked into his belt. We've come to take her back to redemption. To face proper judgment this time. And you, for interfering, Thorn, emboldened by his numbers, added, you defied the town, hunter. Harbored a fugitive. A sinner. Elara stepped out of the cabin, into the pale sunlight. The poker felt solid in her grip. Her legs were shaking, but she stood tall. Her voice, when she spoke, was clearer, steadier than she expected. I am not a fugitive. I am not a sinner to be judged by you. Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Look at her. Playing the grand lady. Your chattel, girl. And you'll learn your place again. He made to dismount. Kaelin shifted, a subtle movement, but it stopped Silas cold. The axe in Kaelin's hand looked less like a tool and more like an extension of his will. She has chosen, Kaelin stated, his gaze unwavering. This is her home. Thorn scoffed. With a savage? In this hovel? She belongs in a civilized place. Under authority, your authority. Elara's voice gained strength. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it no longer controlled her. The authority that ties women to posts and whips them for sport? The authority that treats human beings as less than cattle? A murmur ran through Silas's men. They had not expected her to speak, to defy. Silas's face contorted with rage. You insolent bitch! I'll teach you respect. He swung his leg over his horse. Kaelin moved then, not with speed, but with a terrible, deliberate purpose. He took one step forward. The axe lifted slightly. It was not a threat. It was a promise. If you value your life, Kaelin said, his voice a low growl, you will not touch her. The air crackled with tension. Silas's men looked from Kaelin to their leader, their confidence wavering. The hunter's reputation was a palpable force in the small clearing. They knew the stories. They knew his skill. Thorn, pale and sweating despite the cool air, stammered, this is not over, hunter. The town will not stand for this. The town, Kaelin said, his eyes like chips of flint, is far from here. And the forest has its own laws. Elara looked directly at Silas. I am not running this time. I am not your property. I will not go back. Her words, simple and direct, carried the weight of her entire journey. Of her survival. Of her reclamation. Silas hesitated. He saw the unwavering resolve in her eyes. He saw the deadly quiet in Kaelin. He saw his men, their eagerness for a fight dimming. He was a bully, not a warrior. He spat on the ground. You'll regret this, both of you. You'll starve up here. Or the wolves will get you. He pulled on his reins, turning his horse. Let's go. She's not worth dying for. His men, visibly relieved, followed suit. Elder Thorn cast one last, hateful glare. You'll both burn for this. They rode away, their threats fading into the rustle of leaves, their presence a fading stain on the clean mountain air. Elara stood, watching them go, the poker still clutched in her hand. Her body trembled with the aftermath of the confrontation, but a fierce, triumphant joy surged through her. She had faced them. She had spoken her truth. And she had not broken. Kaelin lowered his axe. He turned to her, his expression unreadable as always, but she thought she saw a flicker of something akin to approval in the depths of his eyes. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He had stood beside her, not in front of her. He had been her shield, but he had allowed her to wield her own sword, her voice. The silence returned to the clearing, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of victory. Of a battle won. Of a future reclaimed. The departure of Silas and Thorn left an echo in the quiet clearing, a fading dissonance against the symphony of the wild. Elara finally lowered the iron poker, her arm aching, her knuckles white. A long, shuddering breath escaped her. It was done. Truly done. She had faced her tormentors, not as a cowering victim, but but as a woman who knew her own worth, her own strength. Kaelan watched her, his gaze steady. He walked over and gently took the poker from her unresisting fingers, setting it back by the hearth. His hand brushed hers, a brief, calloused touch that sent an unexpected warmth through her. He still said little, but his presence was a solid comfort. In the days that followed, a new rhythm established itself, deeper and more settled than before. The confrontation had exorcised the last of Ilara's deepest fears. The shadow of her past no longer loomed so large. She moved with a newfound confidence, her steps lighter, her voice, when she spoke, clearer and more frequent. She had found it here, in this wild place, beside this silent man. Kaelan, too, seemed different. The harsh lines around his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. He still maintained his quiet watchfulness, but there was a subtle easing in his solitary nature. He began to share more of the forest's secrets with her, not just its survival skills, but its beauty. He pointed out the intricate patterns of frost on a fallen leaf, the distant call of a hunting owl, the way the sunlight filtered through the autumn canopy like liquid gold. Small things. Significant things. They worked together, preparing for the oncoming winter. Chopping wood, smoking meat, gathering the last of the wild harvest. Their movements were synchronized, an unspoken understanding flowing between them. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the repaired fawn now grown strong and recently returned to the wild, Ilara found herself tracing the raised scars on her own arm, a faint tracery left by the whip. They no longer brought a sting of shame. They were a testament. Kaelan noticed her gaze. He reached out, his fingers tracing the path of a scar, his touch feather-light. It was the most intimate gesture he had ever made. "They mark you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But they do not define you." Ilara met his eyes. "No," she said, her voice firm. "They remind me that I survived." The rare, almost smile touched his lips. "You did more than survive, Ilara. You fought." He used her name. He seldom did. It sounded different in his mouth. Possessive, yet respectful. Their life was simple. Hard. But it was theirs. Built on a foundation of shared silence, mutual respect, and an unspoken bond forged in peril and tempered in healing. The cabin was no longer just a shelter, it was a home. The fire in the hearth was more than warmth, it was a symbol of their shared existence, a beacon against the encroaching darkness of the world they had left behind. One afternoon, while checking snares near the edge of their territory, Ilara found a young woman, barely more than a girl, huddled and weeping, her clothes torn, her face bruised. She looked like a younger version of Ilara on that terrible dawn in redemption. Another runaway. Another soul discarded by the cruelties of so-called civilization. Ilara's heart went out to her. She did not hesitate. She knelt beside the girl, her voice gentle. "You are safe here." She helped the girl back to the cabin. Kaelan was there. He saw the girl, saw Ilara's compassionate expression, and simply nodded. He added more wood to the fire, put another portion of stew to warm. No questions asked. He understood. Ilara tended to the girl's wounds, just as Kaelan had once tended to hers. She spoke to her softly, offering not pity, but understanding and the promise of sanctuary. Later that night, after the girl had eaten and fallen into an exhausted sleep on a pallet of furs Ilara had prepared, Ilara stood with Kaelan outside the cabin, looking up at the vast, star-dusted sky. The air was cold, clean. "She reminded me of myself," Ilara said quietly. Kaelan put his arm around her shoulders, a natural, comforting gesture. It felt right. "You will help her heal," he stated, not a question, but a fact. "We will," Ilara corrected gently, leaning into his strength. He looked down at her, his moss-agate eyes holding a warmth she had once thought impossible for him. "We will," he agreed, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He had been a solitary guardian. Now, he was a partner. His own emotional wounds, hinted at but never spoken, seemed to be healing alongside hers. He had found a renewed purpose, a reason to connect, not just with her, but with the idea of a shared life. They stood there for a long moment, Two souls who had found each other in the darkest of times, their quiet strength a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The wilderness around them was no longer a place of exile, but a kingdom of their own making. Ilara was no longer the whipped woman, the victim. Kaelin was no longer just the feared hunter. They were two halves of a whole, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. Their new beginning was not loud, nor was it grand. It was as quiet and profound as the forest itself, rooted in courage, respect, and a love that needed no words to declare its truth.